Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Peace be upon you all, and welcome to another episode of Sapient Thoughts, where we discuss theo-philosophical issues, answer some of the questions and contentions that are brought against Islam, and offer a case, a robust case for the veracity and beauty of Islam, inshallah ta'ala, God willing. My name is Anwar'rafat, and today we are discussing the toolkit through which to approach the Sunnah, which is the sayings, actions, and silent approvals or tacit approvals of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. Now, as Muslims, we're commanded to follow his example. This is why it's so important for us to actually read about his life, to understand who he is, to emulate him as much as possible, to follow his commandments, to follow his recommendations, to stay away from the things that he told us to stay away from, because a lot of times we'll find that there's a depth of wisdom there, there's a lot of care, there's a lot of mercy, there's a lot of love. And when we follow the prophetic advice, I believe, as well as many other Muslims, that we can live the best life possible, insha'Allah ta'ala. So, with that said, we are on tool number 3, and in this video we're going to discuss tool number 3 and number 4. Tool number 3, and that is access to a person of knowledge. Now, a person might say, well, isn't the purpose of this whole toolkit in order for me to be able to read the Sunnah? Yes, but because I'm more of a traditionalist in this regard, I would always recommend having someone of knowledge available. They don't have to be the greatest scholar that Islam has ever seen. They can be the local imam of a masjid. They can be a person who specializes in the sciences of hadith. They can be a student of knowledge that's known for their research and their rigor and the things that they're doing. Whatever the case, access to that type of person will save you time and energy and effort. Why? Because many of these researchers, many of these scholars, a lot of times they're not well known. Right? They don't have to have a huge, following online. A lot of times, from my experience, some of the most knowledgeable people were people who had 0 followers online because they weren't really interested in that. They're actually interested in actual research, producing academic works, etc. So if you can find one of these people, reach out to them from time to time. They don't mind. In fact, the whole reason why these people are actually doing the research is to be able to share it with others. And a lot of times they actually welcome good, well thought out questions to the issues that people come across. And a lot of times people have asked that same question before. It is sometimes foolish for us to think that we are asking a question that no one has ever asked before us. There's 1400 years of tradition. Inevitably somebody would have had to ask this question. A lot of times people have. Which means that there's an answer out there. We just have to find people who have that answer. And if you can find that person, they can summarize for you the answer in 2 or 3 minutes. They can maybe expound on it longer than this if they need to. But it will save you, instead of you delving through the research, maybe you don't know where to go, maybe you don't know how to do it. It'll save you time and effort. This is why, for example, we tend to like going to people who have expertise in certain fields. I don't know much about cars. I can research a problem online. I might find an answer, I might not. But if I just talk to my mechanic friend, right? And I'm like, hey, I'm having this issue with my car. He's like, what's your car? What's this? What's that? There you go. In 5 minutes, I've gotten my solution. I've gotten my answer. In fact, he'll tell me what I can do, and it's a very simple fix. It'll save me a lot of heartache, a lot of headache as well, and a lot of time. And so having access to a person of knowledge will do the same for you. And the beautiful thing is that us here at Sapience, we do try as much as possible to answer people's questions, to be able to, counsel them through any, challenges they might come through. And it doesn't have to be with Sapience. It can be literally with anybody who has. I, for one, welcome those types of questions because I would rather somebody hear it from me than hear it from someone who maybe has nefarious intentions. And God knows best. Tool number 4, and that is the tool of knowledge of Arabic and the prophetic language, right? Why? Because obviously the whole corpus is actually in Arabic. Relying on translations alone, a lot of times is not enough. Now, this does not mean that a person has to necessarily be fluent in Arabic, not at all. But if you're familiar with some of the words that are used, and you have access to dictionaries of prophetic language. These are not just dictionaries of Arabic, by the way. In fact, we have whole books in our Islamic tradition that are dedicated to what's known as gharib al-hadith. These are terms that we call are strange or maybe no longer used. The word gharib means strange, right? So the obscure words that we can find in the corpus of the hadith that maybe Arabs later on no longer really used, right? Because it's 1400 years ago. That doesn't mean necessarily that it's not Arabic or that we're speaking a different Arabic, not at all. In fact, a regular Arab can understand easily well over 95%. But sometimes you'll hear an obscure word. For example, there's a hadith of the Prophet ﷺ where he says, من بنى لله بيتا ولو كمفحص قطا بنى الله له بيتا في الجنة. Whoever builds a house for God, even if it is like, and it says mifhasi qata. Now if you took this word, this phrase, and you give it to a regular Arab, just your everyday average Arab, none of them will know what this means. They'll have no clue. In fact, even some more maybe knowledgeable ones, if they've never heard this before, this is the only place in the entire corpus of Sunnah that it exists, and these two words are no longer used in everyday Arabic. So unless you have access to a dictionary, you're going to be like, whoa, what is this word? It actually means a bird's nest, and it's a specific bird that lives in the Arabian Peninsula, right, in that desert climate, and it's known, its nest is literally tiny. It's one of the tiniest nests that you can find, okay? The meaning of the hadith now becomes, if you build a house for God, even if it's as small as a bird's nest, this tiny bird's nest, God will build for you a house in Jannah. So it doesn't matter how big the mosque is or how beautiful, what matters is that you actually did it, right? This is the point. Now, if I didn't have access, this is just a simple example, but we can actually apply this to a lot of other issues and people can misunderstand. So access to these original dictionaries. And by the way, the idea of a dictionary is an Islamic invention. The first dictionaries in any language, were actually the first dictionaries that were written by Muslim scholars to understand the language of the Quran. And soon thereafter, the language of the hadith, which means that they were dictionaries, not for the whole language, but for these obscure words to define them that a person might find in the Quran or in the Sunnah. And then later on, people realized, hey, we can apply this to the entire language. And then, of course, all other linguists copied them to their other languages as well. So for the invention of dictionaries, I want to say to the rest of the world, you're welcome. No, I'm just kidding. But the idea is, we do have dictionaries that are only dedicated to the words that we find in the hadith. And I think it would be very beneficial for a person to be aware of them. You don't have to necessarily have one in your home, but you can definitely access these online as well and realize that there's a linguistic heritage behind it. And a lot of times, even if I linguistically know what something means, it doesn't necessarily mean that I understand the technical definition of it either. With this said, we look forward to seeing you guys for tool number 5 and number 6 in the next episode. Inshallah ta'ala. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.